You know, there's a trend I really don't like in modern literature where you will take one book that's had some degree of success and you just tell the same story but from a different character's perspective. Now, fundamentally, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually think that that can be done well, case in point, Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow. But more times than not, in the last couple of years, it feels like we just get a rehashed story told from a very slightly different perspective that doesn't really fundamentally change our understanding of anything or reframe anything or really fill any gaps, or any gaps that we do get filled in are just so blasé that it doesn't say anything. Twilight, Midnight Sun, 50 Shades of Grey, and Grey, Divergent, and Four. For the most part, these books are just beat-for-beat repeats of the same plot lines that they're copying from. And that is very much what we get with the Dueling Crowns novella pairing of Grimm and Oro. Now, I find the Lightlark series to be exceptionally hollow, with nothing to say narratively, no characters that actually have any character, a magic system which could not be more broken or confused, world building and world history that doesn't begin to make sense. Just nothing about the series works. And this is the worst book in the series. And I say that having finished Crown Tide. Now, I was just going to jump into reviewing Crown Tide, except Aster wrote a couple of references in there that don't really make sense on their own. They're obvious tie-ins to events that happen in the Grimm and Oro book. And I thought I'd go through and try to see if there's any kind of deeper meaning or understanding that I can really glean from that. And no, there's not. The few references that do link these two books are entirely surface level. And any attempt at deepening that understanding is very faulty at best. And just the writing style gets changed up from what she normally does. It's so bad, and it's such a mistake. So normally, Aster writes third-person limited past tense. In Grimm and Oro, she writes first-person limited present tense. And I gotta tell you, it doesn't work for a single page. Yes, we do get more into their heads, and you think that that would help because, God, are these two so flat as characters. I mean, Grimm's bad, but at least Aster paid some degree of attention to him. Oro, what can you say about Oro's character outside of any sort of surface-level immutable traits?
Nothing. Not a goddamn thing.
Now, there is some degree of characterization to be gleaned, but none of it is fulfilling. Very little of it is entertaining, and what it is entertaining about is not what I think Aster was going for. Like, it's comically bad. Grimm, just, oh my God, the perspective shift that you get with him. Oro is so much whinier than I thought. Now, you may be looking at this book and looking at the tabs, and you could be thinking, Crimson, there's not a lot of tabs there. This book is practically naked compared to what you normally do. I can actually see the side of the pages. And yes, there are fewer notes in here for really two reasons. The first one, I wanted this to be a shorter review, so I didn't go as in-depth with my notes. I really just tried to find the more unique elements within this book that weren't just repeats of information from elsewhere in the series. And the other reason is, speaking of repeats, Oro's, I'd say about 60% of Oro's book is just a lazy rehash of the events of Lightlark, and at least 80% of Grimm's is a lazy rehash of the events of Nightbane. In fact, during my research for Crown Tide, I came across an interview that Aster was involved in with another YouTuber on the Booked and Busy podcast. It was an excellent interview. I'll detail more of that in my Crown Tide review, but the host did a great job, a lot of unique questions, which pulled a lot of information that I didn't know about Aster or Aster's writing process. It was invaluable, frankly, so link down in the description if you want to check that out. Anyway, in that interview, Aster reveals that most of Grimm's section of this book was taken directly out of Nightbane.
I I had a lot of Nightbane written before Lightlark came out, but it was actually parts that ended up becoming the Grimm and Oro book, like from his perspective.
So, yes, in fact, we are dealing with information that was left on the cutting room floor, swept up, and hastily reassembled into what Aster is calling a novella. So that means Oro's section is likely just a hastily rewritten rethinking of Lightlark. Now, originally, I wasn't going to bother reading this at all because this is just 2 novellas about uninteresting characters written by fantasy's worst professional author, and it was going for like $27. Look, if Michael Crichton or J.R.R. Tolkien come back from the dead and write a novella, then I will pay $27. Not for this. The only reason I'm bothering with this now is because this got sent to me by a fan, codename Orion. So thank you, Orion. You saved me some money. And even then, he managed to apparently get this on a deal. It's like $12 for the whole thing, which still feels a little much, but it's a lot more reasonable than $27. Also, it's funny because if you put this book in backwards into the jacket thing, you make Grimm look like a manlet, and Oro looks like a peeping Tom.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
So, before we get into this, if there is any compliment that I can give to this book, it's got some really nice art. Like, I do not like the characters of Grimm or Oro, but honestly, this looks really good. I cannot take that away from this book. A lot of the artwork in here does look really good. It doesn't do a thing to help the quality of the writing, but hey, points where it's due. Now, like I said, I don't want to go into exhaustive depth with this book. I want to cover the things that aren't really going to be explored too heavily in the rest of the series. Name a problem with writing, and this book does it. The scene setting is terrible, the character arcs make no sense. Combined with context from prior books, the characters look worse as a whole. The magic system continues to confuse me, and most of this book is written from the perspective of you must be intimately familiar with a lot of the other books, as in, and I mean that as in, yes, you're probably not going to read this if you haven't already read some of the other Lightlark books. I get that. But the book assumes that you have read those other books, and so there's a lot of missing context. There's a lot of problems with the timeline because of that. A lot of things do not make sense even if you have read those other books. This book is written as if you understand the world of Lightlark as well as Aster does. And considering how poorly she translates things in her books and how incomplete a lot of the story is, you're not going to be able to get the full enjoyment out of this thing because none of us understand the world of Lightlark as well as Aster does. She doesn't commit to page the right information told in the right way. Anyway, we're going to go over Oro's section first because there's a bit more information to really talk about there. Grimm's section, like I said, was a lazy recap of Nightbane, but if you want my opinion, it's the worst of the 2. So Oro's section starts right off with him complaining that his father doesn't care about him.
Yeah, dude, my parents hated me! Ha ha! Shucks to be you!
Okay, he's got daddy issues, whatever, but how old is he? Now, Oro could be a little kid here, he could be in his 30s. I honestly don't know. Because their timeline is so ill-defined in the rest of the series, he could be over 100 by this point. And so with Oro starting the book by saying, "Wah, my dad doesn't like me," doesn't set a good image. We get mention of Oro, his brother Egan, and their parents, the nameless king and queen. Hey, Isil's parents don't have names. Why should we start naming parents now? But we open up the second chapter with the first time that Oro's father ever looked proudly at him. The time he accidentally killed a man by gilding an attendant. Yes, we're getting that backstory. One of the only definable moments in Oro's life is the time that he accidentally gilded one of the footmen. So I understand including it in this backstory. That actually makes a lot of sense, and I think exploring that could work. I have a little bit of a problem with the information that's granted, though, because we find out that his name was Albert, and he had a daughter named Pearl. Now, Pearl never makes an appearance in this book. As far as I'm aware, she never makes an appearance anywhere in the series. Why name her? And more accurately, why name her and not Oro's parents? Look, remembering this guy, remembering Albert because this is a traumatic moment, I get that. But a lot of Oro's problems come from how his father mistreats him. As we see in this book, Oro's father was not a sympathetic man. He was actually very demanding of his brother Egan and very dismissive of Oro himself. There is a degree of trauma that comes from that neglect. That's pretty formative in the way that Oro is treated throughout the text in this book. So, why not give his father a name? Oro's parents don't get names, Isla's parents don't get names, Grimm's parents don't get names. But this rando who is in the wrong place, wrong time, and gets turned into a gold statue, he gets a name. He gets, well, not a backstory, but he gets a daughter, I guess. Now, there is a rushed mishmash of info dumping here. Oro trained with a wildling named Elk, and he used to be able to use fire as a baby, and then he just stopped. And his mother talks to him about why he can't use magic anymore, and it's suggested that it's a combination of the neglect, the abuse from his father, as well as this accident with gilding the attendant that caused Oro to lose access to his magic. So his mother has a great solution. We're going to send you to military camp. It's never labeled as such. It's really just training. But because Oro is an origin and he has access to Sunling, Skyling, Moonling, and Starling abilities, he's going to be sent to one of each of the Isles. And the information in those scenes is surprisingly absent. Now, before he leaves, Oro's mother talks to him and says, you've got to find your fire. You've got to find that thing inside you that fuels you so you can shoot fire out of your hands, or however their magic is supposed to work. So he goes and starts with Sunling training first, and he's going with his friend Enya, the woman who her only definable trait is that she knows when she's going to die. And yes, that continues to be the only thing known about her. She announces early on that the Oracle told her when she was going to die, and every once in a while, Oro's like,
You dead yet, Moses? Not yet!
Oh, and also Oro has, I'm sorry for the way I'm bouncing around things. The book reads like this, but Oro reveals that he also has a flare. He is a lie detector, which isn't actually true, but more on that later. Now, interesting thing, Oro believes that his gift is a curse. Like when he asks questions he doesn't want the answers to. Hey, I've got a really easy solution there. Don't ask the questions. Duh! Like, if your flare forced people to tell you the truth, like bent their will or something, then I could understand seeing it as a curse, because there's a degree of cruelty in that. So there are really only two scenes that we get of the Sunling training. The first one is just a couple of other recruits gang up and start beating on Oro because I guess they don't like noble blood, or royal blood specifically, which would suggest that the general populace doesn't like the royal family, but we never see this reinforced or revisited later. Like, they just hate him for the sake of it, as if it's predestined. The other scene is about a month into Sunling training. Oro still can't use his fire, so they throw him into a hole. And no, it's literally, it's not described well, it's just they throw him into some sort of a pit and they close the latch above him, so now he's just completely surrounded by darkness.
Darkness imprisoning me, all that I see, absolute horror. I don't know the words.
And while he's down there, he has the memory of the time that he gilded the attendant. And we're getting the same scene that was listed before, but in more detail. And I don't like how the book just goes back and forth between all these subjects. It feels it feels really rushed. It feels really disorganized, as if Aster's going along and realizes, oh, wait, I can do this for that scene, and rather than go back and actually fix something from a prior scene, just carries forth and barrels through as if this isn't some sort of a jumbled mess. But Oro finishes the memory. We get the next scene where Enya's pissed off at him because they pulled him out of the pit, and she thought he was dead, and says, you were completely limp when they brought you in.
Needle, needle, needle.
Now, Oro's thing up to this point is he's had a lot of trauma that has been forcing him to keep his power suppressed. The thing with Albert shocked him, his father's complete lack of support, and, you know, by extension of that, Oro doesn't get a lot of formal training that he otherwise probably should be getting. Even though he was able to manifest fire when he was an infant in a crib, he can't use it now until Enya sits down here and uses talk no jutsu at him and says, let it out, Oro. Everything you've been pushing down, just let it all go.
Fuck it all, don't give a shit anymore.
And there's this shame that he feels deep inside. Shame from the way that his father dismisses him. Shame from what he did to the attendant. And he stops, like he turns that switch and stops feeling it. And then he shoots fire out of his hands. Oh boy. He found his fire, and he's afraid of what that means. Now, I highlight that particular line because we're going to come back to it, because this scene doesn't work with that later scene in mind. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, some time passes. I don't know how long precisely. It says they were in Sunling training for, well, it just says our last year of Sunling training, so several years? I don't know, honestly. But Oro's walking around with Enya, and we get the line, Enya has yet to tell me how she will die, even though I ask her once every year, on my birthday, or as she likes to call it, the anniversary of our friendship.
I'm going to throw up, and then I'm gonna die!
This is all just melodrama. We don't get to connect to the characters since they don't get time to act or develop like real characters. Aster sets things up so that we're meant to empathize with their situations, but that isn't enough. Situations have a much stronger impact when a character is well developed and compelling. And the entire book reads like this. By the way, that entire arc about Oro not being able to use his powers concluded by page 21. He can use fire now. In fact, it gets him in trouble in the next part because part 2 of his round-the-world training tour is visiting the Moon Isle. Before he does that, we have this brief introduction where he sees Agnes, his brother's guardian, which is both a character and a job title that I did not know existed until this very page. So on the Moon Isle, Oro runs into Instructor Cleo. I don't know why Cleo, the next in line for ruler of the country, is acting as a drill instructor here, but whatever. So on the Moon Isle, it is bloody freezing. So much so that naturally Oro tries to form a little bit of fire in his hand in order to heat things up. Cleo sees that and then forces him to sleep outside as punishment. It is actually so cold out that the flame within has hardened to ice. He can't use it. Like, there's a degree of leeway I'm willing to grant the ecology of this world, but why would anyone live in this place? This sounds miserable. Now, Oro is given a roommate for some reason, and that roommate is Calder, his moonling buddy from the other books. Now, one thing that's important that we learned about Calder is that Calder's father attempted to kill Oro's father. Was eventually killed or banished or whatever, doesn't matter. Calder should want a degree of revenge on Oro for all of that. Well, he may have an opportunity because the training mission that they're sent on is the two of them are paired up and all the other recruits are sent off into the wilderness where they have to survive for some untold period of time. Scavenge off the land, survive the snows and the storms and the beasts and whatnot. Standard survival tropes. Well, it's actually Calder's expertise of the environment that allows them to survive so much. Calder takes point with a lot of the lessons as far as like holding back to avoid storms or tracking animals, building shelters, things like that. There's actually a really funny scene at the end of his introductory chapter where the two of them are off in a mountain trying to survive off the land, and they see a deer, and it starts charging towards Oro. Calder pulls a knife, and Oro turns around and tries to run away, accidentally runs over a cliff's edge, and just like has barely enough time to like turn around and grasp onto the side before completely plummeting over. Oro has been distrustful of Calder the entire time, even though he's got the truth-telling ability. He just doesn't use it because if he did that, it would be inconvenient for the tension that Aster's trying to build for the plot. So Oro is very distrusting of Calder. Well, Calder walks up to the cliff's edge, and there's a moment where he could very easily kick Oro over the side, but instead reaches down and helps pull him back up onto solid ground. And then when he gets to the solid ground, gets his footing again, Oro sees that the deer that was chasing them is now dead. So Calder had enough time to kill this thing with a knife as it was charging at them, and then walk over and casually help Oro before he plummeted to death. The whole thing, just the timing and the not giving a fuck attitude that Calder apparently exudes during all of this is just kind of funny. Now, here's the other thing to really tell us something about Oro's character. During this entire thing, this whole backstory, he doesn't do anything in this training mission. Like, Calder is calling all the shots and pulling all of his weight. He gets the food, he predicts the storms, he says, okay, we should build shelter here. Oro, like, made a campfire at one point, but he's able to do that by going, pfft, and there's fire, so that's not really that big of a deal. During his own backstory to try to flesh out his character, Oro looks worse because Calder's doing all the goddamn work.
John's doing all the fucking work.
Now, the day after Oro completes Moonling training, his father calls him to court. So, we've got the king on one side of the room, all these Sunling nobles lined up, and Umbra, what are you doing? Stop being cute. It's too early for food. There you go. There you go. You're okay. You're okay. The wee voidling. You were still early for food. Alright, so you've got the king, you got all these Sunling nobles lined up, and then you got this prisoner right here on the far end. Well, Oro's been called to court because the king wants to show off and wants Oro to gild the prisoners, like some sort of a petty thief or something. Oro refuses to, obviously. He's a good guy and everything. So we actually get a bit of characterization for the king. He is a monster, so that's great. It also really doesn't work with a bit of conflict that Oro has with Grimm later on, because Oro keeps arguing that Grimm's father was a monster and therefore Grimm must be a monster. It's like, dude, your dad wanted you to execute like a thief, like a petty thief, and make a grand display by desecrating his corpse. Anyway, Oro refuses to do that, and because of that, Oro's thrown in prison.
Hey, there's a guy who couldn't hold on to the soap.
Oh, that was classic.
Well, it's not for too terribly long, because eventually Oro runs into Zed in the prison, and Zed chats with him a little bit, says that he's like a great thief, and eventually busts Oro out of prison. And the chapter where Zed is introduced, the whole thing is just a little over 3 pages long, so laughably short. The chapter ends with Oro saying, "And our group of friends is complete." Now, here's why that really doesn't work. This story is being told in present tense. That means we are living the adventure alongside the characters in the moment. So, for Oro to give the line, "Our group of friends is complete," suggests that he has foreknowledge of how complete his group of friends will ever be. It's part of the problem of Aster is writing this from a perspective of total foreknowledge of everything that happens in the world, even though it doesn't make any sense for Oro to be thinking like this. How could Oro possibly know that they're not going to have any more friends in his group? They still don't have a starling or a wildling. A nightshade is unlikely, but not impossible, and in fact, Grimm does sort of become the 5th member of the group, but it's a line that does not work because it steps outside of character knowledge. It's Common problem in D&D. Character knowledge versus player knowledge. This line only works with player knowledge, but we shouldn't be getting any player knowledge because this entire thing is told from Oro's perspective. It is a mess no matter how you want to look at it. Anyway, time goes by, and eventually Nightshade brings a war to Lightlark's shores. Now, we don't actually get any real significance of the battle here. You've got to read the Grimm section for that, which is a terrible way to write things. You'd think, hey, Oro was involved in a fight. Maybe we should get his perspective. Nah, let's not worry about that. Instead, we get a scene where Grimm is brought to the prison and thrown in there as part of a prisoner exchange. Common condition of war in a lot of medieval settings. In order to prevent further aggressive action, you take a hostage and basically say, okay, if you attack us again, we're just going to kill the prince, or whoever the hostage was. I believe that's what Aster was drawn from. Here's the problem, though. Going forward for the next several chapters, there's going to be an air of suspicion while Grimm is in the prison, and everyone's going to be like, what is he planning? What could he be up to? And because none of them know that he can portal. So that's not really something that they're worried about. Not something they could really control otherwise. They're instead pondering about this thing as if Grimm is up to something. What could he be doing? So Oro was sent to talk to him over the course of several days, weeks, months, I don't know, in order to find out what his possible motivation is. And it's like, I thought he was a prisoner of war. What could his motivation be? Why do you suspect for a moment that he's up to something? Because like, Grimm's not the ruler. His father is still alive. This is all before the curses. But yes, we do get several pages of these two talking together, and they are screaming high school stereotypes. Grimm is the edgy loner boy, and Oro is the preppy rich kid. So they're both obnoxious, but in different ways. Now, during one of these talks, Oro admits that he hates Grimm for a number of reasons, but chief among them is that Grimm's father killed Oro's mother. Now, when I was going through this for the first time, it didn't really make a lot of sense. Why would Oro's mother be anywhere near a battlefield or in any situation where she would reasonably be killed? Because the way that made the most sense, given everything that we've seen of his mother, what little we've seen of his mother up to this point, it sounded like the Nightshades must have somehow invaded the castle and started killing attendants and guests and eventually found the queen and then ran a sword through her or something. No, what we get is actually a retcon for this story much later in Oro's section, where it's revealed that his mother was actually a pretty powerful warrior. I believe she actually defeated Oro's father in combat, and so they got married, and she never fought again and was otherwise subservient to him. So there's an attempt at a girl power moment, and it immediately falters because she gives up the girl power moment. I don't know what Aster was trying to go for with that, because we get just two conflicting images. She's some sort of a badass warrior until she's not. But whatever, she died in combat. It's not described as such here. Again, this is a much later scene that gives more context. Very sloppy writing style. And they go back and forth. Oro visits Grimm several times. And there's one line that Grimm gives that I want to talk about. They're trying to discuss the justifications for the war because the Nightshades, there's no question, the Nightshades were the aggressors in the recent battle against Lightlark. They invaded and attempted to take over, and the army of Lightlark fought back and eventually overpowered them. And Grimm tries to give some justifications. He gives some backstories to some of his characters, or some of his soldiers, and explains that the reason they fought was not because they were, bloodthirsty or monstrous or anything. They were following orders because if they didn't, the king, Grimm's father, would have slaughtered their families. So what does that mean of Oro, who went and killed these people, like Ivan Wolf, who was 207 years old, had 3 daughters, a wife pregnant with a 4th, and could whistle any note, or Eleanor Frey, expert swordswoman, was married for 4 centuries, familiar with every type of metalwork, and really those are the only 2 examples given. But hey, they're dead, and Oro killed them. And so Grimm tries to shoot him with, "Do your intentions matter when they're all dead?" Now, this is one of those lines that sound good when you're a first-year college student and you've gotten a taste of exposure outside of anything else you've really seen, but you don't have the framework to really understand it or to know what questions to really ask surrounding that. It's just pseudo-intellectual tripe. It doesn't have nearly the impact or meaning that Aster is clearly going for. You see, Oro's intentions do matter because Oro was attempting to defend his homeland and the people within that. Yes, he may have been killing people who were otherwise victims of a merciless king. That sucks. But that doesn't negate the good that Oro was attempting to do. I think what Aster was going for with this particular line was she was trying to spark some sort of a deeper discussion, something for the audience to really sink their teeth into and try to ponder over in their own life and wonder, oh yes, you've got a point, and really it just winds up on the front page of I Am 14 and this is deep. And again, you really need the character work in place for a moment like this to stick. Case in point, Javik from Mass Effect 3. See, what I really liked about Javik's character is that he did have the understanding for how ruthless and how thorough and how efficient the Reapers were. The way that they were able to systematically wipe out all of the Protheans or subjugate them into slavery. It's like when you really understand, they took everything from the Protheans. It just removing even culture to the point where their weaponry in Mass Effect 2, it doesn't really have any characterization. It's just it's built for a more robotic purpose rather than anything that would actually give the collectors a proper advantage. So for Javik to come back and understand the desperation involved, he doesn't care about intent when he talks to Shepard about the like why he sees everything in black and white. You're either with me or against me.
Those who share my purpose become allies. Those who do not become casualties.
And that really comes to a head when he sums up his point with this line.
Stand in the ashes of 1 trillion dead souls and ask the ghosts if honor matters.
And I don't believe he's exaggerating when he says 1 trillion souls. Like, the way that we understand the war, 1 trillion actually sounds like a reasonable estimate for how many people were killed by the Reapers. So we get that degree of depth associated with that characterization. It works. It works damn well. And so we understand what really makes him tick, why he thinks in black and white in this instance. He doesn't care about the legitimacy of, or the ethics rather, of tactics as long as it works in the end. If you try to fight the Reapers honorably, you run the risk of losing and dying anyway. God, that game had so many good lines. Anyway, skipping ahead a little bit, you remember Agnes, Egan's, what is it? Guardian. These characters and titles are so memorable. Well, Agnes has a daughter named Ava, and Ava, for some reason, was allowed to sneak off into the Midnight Woods, which is the one dark section of the Star Isle which is overrun by monsters that has not been eliminated by the Sunling army for some reason? You think that'd be kind of a priority if people can just accidentally themselves into the woods and die. So everyone's pretty much given up on Ava because she is an undetermined age, but young, and it's been like 12 minutes, so she's probably dead. Well, Oro doesn't want to give up so easily, so he goes and finds Grimm and says, hey, there's a little girl missing in these woods that'll kill her. You want to come help a rescue? And they go and do a rescue. Well, they get there, and we get an extremely nondescript and underwhelming fight where Grimm and Oro have to fend off a whole bunch of monsters, but eventually they are able to find and rescue Aura, who does need a healer, but she is otherwise alive. Oh boy. Now, this is really funny because I read the Grimm section of this before I read Oro, so there is a very passing mention of, what is her name? Aura. These characters are so memorable. But it's listed in extremely passing details. Like, oh yeah, there was that one time Oro and I rescued a kid. That was cool. Anyway, this little rescue with Aura is enough to convince Oro to call in a favor on Grimm's behalf. So that's how Grimm is allowed free reign in the castle. He's not allowed to attack anybody or do evil, but if he behaves himself, he can wander freely. Well, sometime later, again, it's not clear because Aster never gives us timelines or dates. Grimm has been allowed out, and the way this one chapter opens, Enya is kind of complaining because Grimm is popular with the ladies, and so she says, look at them throwing themselves at him like his family isn't responsible for killing thousands of us. It sounds like Grimm has been out for maybe a week, maybe a couple of days, something like that. No, it's been at least a year. A little more than a year, actually. There is no sense of time. Nothing really makes sense when you try to place like one thing after another. And the way that the sentences are written like this, you think you understand what's going on, and it is so difficult to try to get a sense of time or world building or setting or anything in this book. It is impossible to keep track of so many events because Aster is so just lazy with the details on everything that nothing builds on top of itself. Nothing builds to the next event. Nothing is established in any concrete fashion. I still don't know how old Oro is supposed to be. Anyway, they're all at the bar, and Oro sits down with Grimm. They're not quite friends, but they're getting there. And Grimm gives him a little bit of advice and says, your brother's having an affair. That doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Oro understands that his brother has been betrothed to Aurora, the ruler of the Starlings. God, it all sounds so stupidly similar. Egan has been betrothed to Aurora for years. And even though this is purely a political thing for Egan, for Aurora, it's not. She actually is like genuinely in love with Egan. And I think we all remember what that turns into. Anyway, even though no name is actually dropped, Oro somehow knows that Egan is having an affair with Violet, the ruler of the wildlings, and Isla's grandmother, I think. Could be great-grandmother, I honestly don't know. I'm not sure the author knows. So, Oro scolds Egan and says either marry Aurora or call off the engagement, and it's implied that he ends the affair. Well, 10 years later, Oro's just wandering around when he runs into his brother, I believe he's shirtless, with Violet. So yeah, the affair is still going on, and on the bottom of the page it says, you're set to be married in weeks. So, okay, 10 years, according to the chapter heading, and we're told it's been years since Egan and Aurora have been betrothed. So I'm calling that's at the very least 3 years at that point. So 3 and 10, they've been betrothed for 13 years at the least. It could be more than that. Saints wish they could be as patient as Aurora. So yeah, Egan's been hiding this affair for more than a decade by this point, and he plans to step down, to abdicate the throne and allow Oro to rule. Well, that Oro doesn't want the job, but it does grant him a certain position. See, it really just becomes some sort of, if he develops a friendship with Grimm, then Grimm stages a coup and kills his father. The two of them will rule Sunling and Nightshade, respectively. And that means that they can actually work towards some degree of peace. And as soon as they shake hands, there is a scene break, and then the next morning the curses are in place. And everyone's screaming, because everyone's dead. Like, the Sunlings don't know what's going on, so they'll step out into the sunlight and burst into flames. Agnes and her daughter are dead, and Grimm shows up and says, I know how this looks, this isn't my fault. And Grimm uses his flare and The second the words leave his mouth, I feel the lie. It's twisted, edged slightly in the truth, but the bitterness is enough. Now, if you don't remember, what gets revealed at the end of Lightlark, Grimm helped Aurora locate the heart egg of Lightlark. So Aurora was granted some incredible degree of power and made a wish on it or something, and it unintentionally created the curses. So Grimm saying that this isn't his fault is actually kind of true. There's more truth to it than not. But Oro decides to listen to the lie of it and doesn't really try to give him a chance, even though he was just talking about peace treaties a page ago. And he even adds the line, I will be better than this cursed demon in front of me. He is his father, I am not mine. Even though this goes against the lesson that he learned with Calder previously. So, bit of a conflict right there, and no one calls him out on that. Now, yes, he is acting emotionally here, because he's got all these corpses around him, including his brother, so he doesn't really have the wherewithal to stop and properly account for everything. I get that, but at the same time, no one ever challenges him on this with, hey, you know one of your best friends was in this position too? Like, Calder had you dead to rights on the edge of a cliff. You didn't know how to fly by that point, so he could have killed you. But he didn't. And with the accusation made against Grimm, Oro watches as any light within him, Grimm, flickers, and then gutters out. So, okay, curses are in effect, and none of this works. Like, Oro just assumes that the Nightshades were able to create some sort of a mass curse event which just wiped out the Sunlings. And you gotta really start questioning the logic behind that. Without an ounce of investigation, Oro claims Grimm and the Nightshades are responsible for the curses spun against the land, even though Grimm denied it, and logically it makes no sense. If Nightshades could spin a curse to an entire realm, why wouldn't they have done that before when they were at war? This is an incredible advantage in combat, and they were at war for several years before this. This also demonstrates that the friendship that Oro claimed just a page ago was based on nothing and was paper thin, which would be useless if Grimm undertook the coup like the two of them had discussed. He even had the audacity to judge Grimm, claiming that he was better than this demon. And even though there are plenty of adventures that Oro could still go on after all of this as he's trying to restabilize society and understand the nature of the curses, we don't get any of that because the book goes and skips the next 500 years. And this is where any importance that the story can really contribute just gives up entirely. So much of this is a lazy recap of the events of Lightlark, but from Oro's perspective. And wow, is it disappointing. So yeah, the next 160 pages or so are just a recap, just a revisit of Lightlark. And it is obvious that Aster lost all interest in writing by this point. There is scant detail for the majority of the following 160 pages. There are plenty of opportunities for Oro to explain certain things, certain gaps in Isla's story, where he was off-screen doing something else, where he was trying to hunt down that ghost that one time, where I'm struggling to think of other examples, but Oro is such an unremarkable character, it's hard to remember anything. And I think that's most evident on page 106, where Oro is watching everybody warp in on the insignia, and he's just like taking account, oh, okay, Grimm showed up, and there's the wildling, and there's Cleo, and everything. And it's told as if he's right there with everybody else, but it's not until the following page where it's revealed that he's watching everything from one of the castle's towers. Now, this is one of the best examples I've got as far as Aster doing a terrible job of scene setting, because we don't have that understanding of where Oro is in relation to everyone and everything else as the story is going on. It's likely, like, him being in a tower does make sense considering everything. Being a sunling, he can't really go out in light, and it is maybe mid-afternoon during this scene in the original book. And Oro looks at Isla and is reminded of Violet and remembers that on the day of the curses he vowed never to fall in love. Love made even my brother into a fool, which is another in a very long list of comparisons that he has with Grimm. But getting ahead of myself. Now, something that I find interesting, and for the most part, it would be a waste of time for me to just go plot point by plot point, because if you've seen my Lightlark video, you know pretty much everything that happens. However, because we have things told from a different perspective, there is occasionally a bit of information that we don't get in Lightlark, and that's what we'll be covering. For example, we've got this thing right here on 107, where Oro is watching everyone from the castle tower, where he is careful to stay in the shade of a few overhead clouds. So, okay, the cloud coverage, however thick that is enough to protect him from the harmful whatever effects of standing in sunlight. If that's true, then shouldn't all sunlings be able to walk around with like really heavy umbrellas? A lot of that comes down to what are the sunlings actually reacting to? Is it just the light from the sun? Because that's still pouring through the clouds, so that can't be it. It can't be the radiation, because that's coming through the clouds as well. Maybe it's more of a symbolic thing and they can't feel the clouds' warmth. Well, okay, then thick clothes and, again, heavy umbrellas. In an attempt to justify a certain image that she wanted to keep in place, that being Oro watching everyone during the daytime, she had to come up with some sort of an excuse for why Oro wasn't being affected by the sunlight, but couldn't think of anything that didn't contradict prior canon, completely ignoring the fact that telescopes exist. Think of it like this. Oro could have been in a pitch black room, no windows or anything, with a small hole that feeds directly to a telescope lens that he uses to keep an eye on the insignia so he can see the rulers as they're coming in. Now, that would be very limited in motion. Maybe the telescope would be stuck in the wall and he wouldn't be able to like pan it around anywhere. But considering the strategic importance of the insignia and the fact that he knows everyone is going to be warping there specifically, you wouldn't really need it to pan around anyway. It would be a single-use thing, but the information gleaned from that would be potentially useful. And it wouldn't be exposed to the sun! Unless you can't, like, see the rays shooting through the telescope, because that hurts you. But if that's the case, what good would cloud coverage do? Skipping ahead a little bit, we get the scene where they all have that initial banquet, and Isla is given a heart from, like, I think Oro said it was like one of the most notorious criminals in their prison. We get a line of prose, that says, Grimm jumps up and demands the heart be removed. So this is one of those times where Aster is rushing through the scene as much as possible and not really thinking about how the characters inside would really talk or react or anything. We don't get any dialogue during this scene, even though it would be very easy to do exactly that because you're copying it from a different book. There is a lot of telling and not showing in this story. There are a lot of occasions where Aster has an ample opportunity to try to explain or reevaluate a scene from Lightlark through Oro's perspective. He doesn't like Isla in this scene. He seems to be reacting negatively to the memory of Violet. And through that, we would have gotten a different, or we could have gotten a different story. But we don't, because the information that we get is so limp, so loosely described, that there's really no story to glean. The information is just unengaging. There is nothing here. In fact, that seems to sum up a lot of what Oro's scenes really are. He's not so much a character in his own right. He's physically present, but that's about the best you can give him. Like, going forward, his scenes where we're just repeating stuff from Lightlark comes down to him slowly falling for Isla and resenting Grimm. And then we get those same points over and over and over ad nauseum. Another example of Aster just rushing through this as fast as possible with nary any detail is when we get to the duels. Because I believe it was Grimm's, because they had all those challenges before during the Centennial in order to give that pointless team up idea. And the scene that we get here from Oro's perspective is just, it's a summary. It is a very quick summary of events. Now, eventually, there's a bit more detail when we get Oro fighting Isla, and Oro eventually comes out on top, but he figures out that she's lying during that whole thing, and I guess this is supposed to be like the start of their, well, not relationship, proximity, I guess. Now, there are plenty of opportunities that we've got in order to fill in gaps that we didn't get in Lightlark. For example, Grimm runs into Oro early on and explains that Lark Crown is alive. This whole scene is just over a full page in length, and it feels like it's here out of obligation. It's not to deepen the characters, it's not to trade snarky banter. It's here because if Aster didn't include this scene where she included it, then it would have possibly been seen as a plot hole because, hey, when did Grimm ever actually say that Lark is alive? It also seems to contradict events from Lightlark because near the end of that, Oro suggested that they kill Grimm and let the Nightshades die out as according to the prophecy. But Grimm here says that his bloodline keeps her imprisoned, kill me and she'll be unleashed. Okay, so then killing Grimm at that point in Lightlark would unleash her. I don't get it. Like, why suggest killing Grimm later on if that would actually... Because he can tell that Grimm's not lying. Why kill him later if that's going to enact something worse? Now, something that Aster really screwed up on is the fact that Oro was dying. He announced that he was dying over that tea ceremony in Lightlark, and I gotta wonder, how did he discover that? What was his reaction when he first noticed that there was something wrong? Because it's described as a discoloration on his arm, I believe. Yeah, discoloration on his arm. How did his friends react to this? Like, why is he dying in the first place? There is room for an emotional scene as these characters are all trying to figure out what's wrong with Oro, what's going on with his arm. And his friends could bemoan the tragedy, not just for what this means for themselves, but the fact that one of their oldest friends, someone that they've known by this point for about 500 years, is dying. But we don't get any of that, because that takes the focus away from Isla. And Isla is, in fact, the reason for this series. Heaven forbid we actually get a different POV that focuses on something other than the core Mary Sue character. Although, spreading off from that, we do get an interesting line. Oro says that his death would lead to the death of thousands. Now, I highlight that because it brings a core problem with the population of Lightlark. Something that I have never enjoyed is the fact that we don't understand how populated this planet is. It always seems to have a whole bunch of people when there needs to be a whole bunch of people, but barely anyone any other time. There are times where we get these massive battle scenes where it's, oh yeah, we've got fighting over there and fighting over there and fighting up there, but plenty of other times where it's like, Isla will go through the Agora and it feels like the only other person who's physically present is the guy that sells her chocolate, or the guy that gives her information, or the tailor in that one scene. The population of Lightlark seems to fluctuate depending upon what the story actually needs at that exact moment. There is no consistency that expands beyond just that one moment. And that's a problem because now it's that much harder to understand the stakes, the scale of who's at risk, the state of the world at large. I mean, in Skyshade, we're told that all the wildlings are taken away and dropped somewhere in the Nightshade Newlands. Okay, how many people is that? Like 24? 2,000? Maybe even more than that. I honestly don't know. The author doesn't seem to know. But here, this is the first time we've gotten any sort of a real hint as to the possible population of Lightlark. Now, Oro dying would lead to the deaths of at least the Sunlings. I can't recall exactly if his death would lead to the deaths of the Moonlings, Starlings, and Sunlings, or Skylings. I don't think that's the case, but I could be wrong. But for now, let's just stick with the Sunlings. Okay, so it says his death would lead to the deaths of thousands. Not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, thousands. So, Lightlark, whatever its situation is, probably has certainly less than 20,000 people, probably less than 10,000. And if we assume the same for the other realms, possible exception for the Starlings, because their curse is especially screwed up, then that means that this entire planet has a population of less than 100,000. There is no single state in America that has a population that small. So the story just goes on. We're getting a lot of scenes from Lightlark, just the trial scenes. We finish up with the mirror scene where Cleo wins the test of fear. And Oro starts following Isla around, so much so that even though she is disguised when she goes to the Sky Isle, he recognizes her because he's becoming a damn expert in her. You see, they keep having these little moments where they're running into each other, and it's just something so nondescriptly compelling about her that he's instantly drawn to her. So of course he keeps thinking about her. In fact, during the test of fear, when he's stuck in the mirror, it's remembering the color of Isla's eyes that helps him escape. Now, why is he drawn to her? 'Cause she's the main character, obviously. I really can't think of anything else. There's nothing in this text that suggests why he would be drawn to her. She's generally attractive. That's honestly the best I've got. Like, the two of them have barely even talked by this point. Oro could be feeling lust for the first time in his life. Like, God, he's got to be almost 600 years old by this point. But of course, this just goes in line with how simplistic the whole story arc is. Now, there's something else that I don't like, and the fact that Oro and Grimm were basically palette swaps of each other in Lightlark. Well, that actually comes full force as we get Grimm's perspective, because now we see the budding relationship between these two as they're going through, as Oro is going through the events of Lightlark. We get one line on 149 where he says, you disgust me. The fact that I can't stop thinking about you disgusts me. The fact that I can't breathe around you disgusts me. The fact that I've been following you around for weeks and you don't know it disgusts me. Don't worry, buddy, it disgusts me too. So in this way, we see that Oro's relationship with Isla is formed almost exactly the same way that Grimm's was formed. And the fact that we have everything from Grimm's perspective kind of confirms that later on. So the two of them not only have a lot of similarities as characters already, but they have the exact same romance arc with the exact same woman. And it's the same nondescript, oh, I can't get her out of my head nonsense, rather than trying to develop who Isla is as a person. They never try, like, neither Oro nor Grimm try to get to understand who Isla is on a deeper level. Everything is surface level and extremely basic. It doesn't work because it comes off as weird, creepy stalker behavior that gets rewarded later on. Look, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but Grimm literally watches her sleep, and Oro just follows her around everywhere to the point where it doesn't make any sense. Now, as the trials continue, Oro talks with his friends, and they wonder if Isla could be working with Grimm. And there's a very easy way to find out about that, and that's Oro using his flare to tell if she's lying. Well, he talked with her at one scene, and actually got some information where she says that she is not working with him. There's a little caveat that rears its head later on that doesn't quite work, but I'm getting ahead of myself. What's weird is that Oro says that he hasn't used his flare in centuries. Like, why not? You're the ruler of your kingdom. Why wouldn't you use this for the benefit of your people? Like, he says it's not fair, but you are more magically gifted than anyone else on the island. Possible exception for, like, Cleo and Grimm, and Isla later on, as we'll see, but that is a whole thing I am saving for Crown Tide. It's a very unnecessary line. There is no reason for him to have stopped using it for several centuries, and now he's using it constantly just to follow a woman around. And despite not using his power for centuries, Oro talks with Isla and pretty much has it running on autopilot. Not even for anything that's like all that revealing, because she has a line where I think this is when they've teamed up and they're starting to work together, and he's got dirt on him, and she says, "You look even worse up close." And he's like, "Huh, she's lying." Like, she was clearly being sarcastic, my guy. No shit, she was lying. Now, we do get a bit of an expansion on a scene that was very much glossed over in Lightlark, and that being Oro and Azul talking about what realm is going to get sacrificed in order to fulfill the prophecy. And Azul somehow convinced all of his people to just do a mass suicide and everybody dies. That's, of course, stupid, and I refuse to believe that that would work in this universe, but whatever. Well, Oro doesn't like this, and so he goes to Zed, who is also a Skyling and would have, I guess, been involved in this vote, and he gives a very telling but very not well thought out line. And it says, yes, 500 something years is a little much, don't you think? So, okay, he's been alive for 500 years, and I guess he's lived a good long life, except we don't understand what a standard lifeline is supposed to look like in the world of Lightlark. So the line 500 years is enough only makes sense when you're talking about our perspective from the readers. Our lifelines span between like 70 to 100 years, give or take. So the idea of living for 500, of course, sounds fantastic. That's a pretty long life, don't you think? Well, that's not the perspective that anyone in this world would have. We don't know how long they're supposed to live. We don't know what a natural lifeline looks like. It could be 500 years. It could be 10,000. Lark is still alive, so that's a thing. As far as we can tell, everyone, just as long as they don't suffer a mortal wound, everyone should live forever. They're like elves in that way. So, with that in mind, it doesn't make any sense for Zed to have this stupid notion. 500 years is enough. Compared to what? What if 1,000 years is perfectly bog standard? What if 1,000 years is like middle age? 500 years is nothing then.
When the universe was forged in the crucible of the Big Bang, our mighty race was already 17 years old.
This book is stupid. So we get that one scene from Lightlark where Oro and Isla are searching around, and Isla gets attacked by the thorn bush, and she's got all those barbs embedded in her, bleeding all over the place. Her blood's not doing the thing, and Oro stops to help her out. Well, at one point, she's in so much pain that he offers his hand in place of her tongue and sticks his hand in her mouth so that she can bite down on something while he's picking the barbs out of her back. And later on, he realizes that he never healed his hand, so there's like a deeply embedded bite mark in his hand. They form crescents against my skin. They will heal in time. I don't do anything to speed it up. So I'm reminded of Grimm's chest stab wound that he never healed, even though he wasn't in love with Isla for several weeks beyond that point, and it made no sense for his character to not heal that. So at this point, I gotta wonder, does Aster have some sort of a wounding fetish or something, where you'll leave a mark on the other person and that's some sort of a sign of devotion or something? Look, I'm not trying to shame anything, I'm just questioning. It's weird that it's happened twice. There's actually a line that confuses me later on. So there's that moment where Oro takes Isla to meet the Spectre for information about where to find the heart egg, even though I'm pretty sure that information ended up being a lie, whatever. And they're leaving, and the deal that they made was that Isla would get to see the Sun Isle Library. Oro agrees, but then says that they're not going anytime soon. And then we get the line, "When I tell her she should have been more specific with her request, like an ass." And I believe that's supposed to be, "Then I tell her she should have been more specific." So it's either a sentence fragment or a typo. Good job, editors. And then we skip a whole lot of this. This line. Okay, so we get that scene where Isla tells Oro that she doesn't have powers. Specifically, she says the words, "I was born powerless." And then Oro reacts to the whole thing. And the way that his truth-telling powers have always been described is like they've been associated with flavors. For some reason, his truth-telling powers, if someone's telling the truth, it tastes sweet. If someone's lying, it tastes bitter. I don't want to say that that can't work, but it's not a sense that I would have gone with, but whatever. He can taste how true Isla's statement is. Truth with a hint of that falseness that I can't decipher. Now, think about that. Where Isla was at this point in the story, she did not know that she actually always did have powers and was entirely too powerful to begin with. She was convinced that she was born without powers. She is, in fact, telling the truth as far as she sees it. She does not know otherwise. A lie is defined as intentionally false statements, or an intentionally false statement made to deceive. In that way, Isla is not lying right now. Isla has every reason to believe that she was born powerless. And this is something which is backed up by other people in the world that are powerless, but whatever. Aster didn't think of that when she wrote this scene. So, for Oro to get truth with a hint of that falseness I can't decipher, that means that he does not really have a lie detecting ability. He has a reality detecting ability. Now, of course, this was written this way because we know that Isla does in fact have powers. They're just locked inside of her for stupid narrative reasons. But Aster tripped herself up and didn't want to write the idea that Isla's powerless because, hey, someone would have gotten confused by that because the book is stupid. Rather than write what she mistook for a contradiction, Aster tried to give herself an out by saying, yeah, okay, it's mostly true, but there's a shade of something that's quite not true there. And if that's the case, then Isla's intention as far as telling the truth or telling a lie doesn't matter. Oro can take someone's statement like this and can determine by extension from, like, if he gets an answer like this, truth with a hint of falseness he can't decipher, then he should be able to answer some very big questions, like things that go beyond perception, whether or not something's true or not. Is God real? Am I a bad person? What caused the Bronze Age collapse? Who farted in the break room last week? Those are all questions that should be answered through this, like, idea. If a question has an objective answer, if there is a definitive black and white to what's really going on, Oro, as is showcased by this example, can now discern whether or not something has a hint of objective truth behind it outside of the perception of the person speaking. Oro is basically able to read the script of the universe. The person talking does not need to know if they are telling the truth or not. If there is a hint of falsehood that he cannot decipher, then logically there is some degree of answer beyond what's being said. Like, this is something that Aster never thought through, but she has created such an incredible clusterfuck for herself just with one stupid line to give herself an out that she never needed to write in the first place. But Aster is absolutely beholden to the tropes that she loves, the worst of which being the enemies to lovers trope. We get a scene that was not in Lightlark because this is a dream. Oro is dreaming he's on a beach with Isla, and he tells her, I hate you, Isla, I really do. I wish we were not enemies, but we are. This is such a desperate attempt to wedge in the enemies to lovers trope. It doesn't work because nothing outside of this really fits. Yes, Oro has been acting really weird and really strangely aggressive, like in his inner monologues against Isla. He has been highly suspicious. He's been following, he's been stalking her in multiple scenes. So he looks adversarial in this way. But that is context that was not provided in Lightlark. Oro was a different person as far as the romance angle to Isla in this way. But now with this context, he's pretty much exactly the same as Grimm. The one distinction that he actually had, aside from like his color palette, was that he wasn't an out-and-out son of a bitch. But by attempting to force the enemies to lovers trope, Oro is necessarily made a worse person through what little context we're able to gather. Especially because this is one of the only lines where they're actually, like, he's adversarial enough to the point where he says, I hate you, I really do. But again, this is a dream sequence, so this never really happens. It doesn't manifest itself in reality. They never reach enemies to lovers. At worst, they're like disinterested co-workers to lovers. And Oro just looks petulant the whole time. Now, I know that this is a very long list, but one of the worst scenes in Lightlark was the moment where Oro betrayed Isla by telling everyone that she couldn't use powers, which put a target on her back, and she had to go running and seclude herself so that no one could find her. It was an entirely unnecessary scene, especially when you consider that Oro pretty much does a whoopsie-daisy and undoes it a couple of chapters after that. The whole thing came off as entirely unnecessary, especially because the little bit that we do get, little bit of context that we do get from that scene is that he needed to work with Cleo in order to search certain parts on the Moon Isle. Now, you would think this would be a great opportunity in order to fill in those gaps and really explore what the two of them did, what Oro and Cleo did in looking for whatever, like the heart egg on Moon Isle. What areas were so secluded and so harsh that it necessitated betraying Isla and working with Cleo in order to find them? Well, we don't know. They're not written about. There is a vague line that gleams over the idea that Oro did work with Cleo, but we get no specifics as far as where they searched, what they did, or what Cleo's contribution could have been. And Oro eventually catches up and finds Isla frozen in ice and about to be cannibalized by the Vinderlands. Saves her, takes her back to the castle, and thaws her out, and tries to explain himself. And he says, I tell her why I needed Cleo. It's true, every word. Except we never get any of that detail. It feels like such an incredible missed opportunity, especially when there are two dream sequences in Oro's section that were not in Lightlark, that don't really add anything. They hint at the idea that Oro is falling in love with Isla, but that's just so pointless. And then he says, it's true, every word. And something I want to highlight is he claims that he has never lied to Isla. However, Isla at one point, like right before she reveals that she has no powers, she asks, can I trust you? And he says yes. He then betrays that trust when he tells everyone that Isla has no powers, and therefore Isla never really could have trusted him. He did in fact lie to her. Look, we are getting more about Oro, and none of it makes him look good. Anyway, a bit more time goes by. We get the Carnal Party, which I think was day 75 of the Centennial, and that one ends when someone attacks Celeste, Starling leader Aurora, and she is poisoned and left floating in some spider webs or something, who cares? Well, in Lightlark, it's pretty obvious that Aster was trying to frame Azul and make it look like Azul was responsible for all that. Celeste dropped Azul's ring, and that was the indicator that Azul was the one who poisoned her. Well, for some reason, Oro is under the impression that Cleo attacked her. And this is something that he pretty much holds to for like the rest of his section here. I don't understand why he gets this wrong, especially if he was watching everyone so intently from the tower when they all warped in on the insignia, because that's when Isla gave Azul the diamond ring that Celeste dropped in this scene. I have entirely too many notes on that book. Why do I remember this stuff? It just feels like Aster forgot her own story. Eventually they get the heart egg of Lightlark. Isla gets shot in the heart. Grimm shows up out of nowhere and teleports. This is how Oro learns that Grimm can teleport. And then Oro has a quick meeting with Cleo and Azul behind Isla's back to decide what realm should be sacrificed in order to get rid of the curses and fulfill the prophecy. And Oro confronts Isla and says, hey, we've got to kill one realm. You get to pick. Is it Starling or Nightshade? And it should be this big emotionally stirring moment where Isla is resisting the urge to really pick anyone, and Oro is trying to push her into picking Grimm because he's the biggest threat, and now Lark isn't a threat for some reason. I don't know. I don't think that works. But the whole thing is mashed together. Rather than be this big, expansive, emotionally stirring scene, the whole thing is condensed to just like that big. That's pretty much nothing. But again, that's because this scene isn't very interesting to Aster because it doesn't go to the enemies to lovers romance trope that she is striving for. Look, you don't have to love every scene in your book, but if you don't treat every scene with care, it's going to look sloppy and come off like you don't care. And goddamn if Aster does not care. There is a pretty funny line here though, because we get that last bit where everything was coming together, like all these plans and everything was starting to make sense at the end of Lightlark when Celeste's plans and everything came out into the open and Grimm's involvement was revealed and Isla had all these conflicting emotions and everything and it just... none of that works. Well, because Aster clearly just wants to finish... because, to give you an idea... I've got an entire climax to go through here, and there are like 6 pages left in this story. Climax and resolution. There's no time for any of it. It gets really bad in a second. Hold on. So Oro flies over to the Place of Mirrors where the climax of Lightlark happens. Celeste is there, Grimm is there, Isla is there, and some of the things are starting to get unraveled, and Oro figures out that Grimm kept Isla in the dark, and he says, Grimm kept Isla in the dark, he didn't let her in on his plan, he made all these decisions for her. Okay, that's a fine thing to criticize. Here's the problem. Oro's a hypocrite. That scene where he was revealing that Isla was powerless to the other rulers, he was making decisions for her in that scene, wasn't he? He kept Isla in the dark, didn't let her in on his plan. Pot meet kettle! And then we finally get the scene where Isla fights Celeste, Aurora, whatever, and it is... the whole thing is so laughable. Now, Aster has never done a fight scene well, not once, but this might actually be the worst one. I'm kind of amused at how bad this is. Aurora underestimated her, but they're going to learn. I watched them learn as Isla manages to escape, but then she does the unthinkable. She returns with armor and blades. She doesn't have any reason to care about us or this island. Still, she returned. I'm both relieved and horrified. Her face is set in determination, the fire in those green eyes blazing. She is blazing.
That is bullshit. Blazing, still my heart is blazing.
She is magnificent. Aurora tries to cage her, but that cage shatters. And Isla wields the heart of Lightlark. Somehow, she's using it. She takes off towards Aurora, not wasting a second. The needle, the bond maker that transfers power in her hand now. Aurora wasn't expecting any of this. Her features morph and twist, transforming back to Celeste. Don't trust her, I want to scream to Isla. She doesn't. Of course she doesn't. Isla doesn't hesitate before stabbing the woman she thought was her friend, right in the heart. Then the island shatters. The world slows. I watch Isla be thrown back with the force of the curses being broken, the original offense committed again. I watch as the floor in the Place of Mirrors fractures in half. This is like if you need a storyboarder, but the only one around is like your 5-year-old with ADHD and time management problems.
He can fly and raise your eyes. Sit in the fucking corner.
So whatever. Somehow Oro is under the implication that Isla loves him. There's no dialogue here. It's just she loves me and I love her and she loves me back. Oh boy, kissy face. Like this is hilariously rushed. There is a moment here at the very end where Aster tries to wrap everything together to harken back to the beginning. because Oro remembers that his mother told him, find your fire. And he looks into Isla's face, and when I look at her eyes, blazing green with flecks of gold, I think I found her. He found his fire before, and then he found his fire again. Look, I get hearkening back. That makes a lot of sense and actually would be really good if it was done right. But the problem is, he already declared that he found his fire previously. So why is finding it again necessary? Yes, it broke him out of some degree of a cage that he put himself in for no real reason, but whatever. But to declare it so determinately, so early in the story, again on page 21, and then to just repeat it here sounds really sloppy. And keep in mind, he also declared once he met Zed that his band of friends was complete, so he had foreknowledge then. Is it not unfair to assume that he had foreknowledge when he said that he found his fire on page 21? You can tell this was written with like a single pass through, done as quickly as possible. Oro's scenes, just, they're so bad. What little we get is largely in conflict with a lot of events in Lightlark, and I think it's blatant that Aster had no regard for his character or this portion of the story. There was so much that she could have done, so many gaps that she could have filled in, and she chose to skip most of it. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think we get the details of Cleo's trial during the Centennial. Like, I think Aster forgot to write that entirely. I could be wrong. It could be that my eyes were just glossing over everything because I'm not looking at this as detailed as I was. But that's even in question for me right now is not a good sign. Oro's scenes, at least early on before the Centennial, are told with no connective tissue between them. Oro isn't a real character with any real agency. He only exists in Isla's orbit. Outside of that, he doesn't really have any story to tell. It's a lazy rehash of Lightlark. Aster could have given him a new arc, or used the chance to expand on a few things that we didn't get from Isla's telling of events. Instead, Oro only exists as an object used to bolster Isla. Even when she isn't the POV character of the story, she becomes the focal point of the story. She is the ultimate Mary Sue. Additionally, this doesn't feel like it was written from Oro's perspective, but rather the perspective of someone writing about Oro while also knowing everything that Isla was doing. There is a section that I skipped on page 136 where Oro was watching Isla walk into the Skyling castle, then leave angry, and he somehow knows that she was searching in the library. What could possibly bring him to this conclusion unless his perspective is told from the POV as someone who already has all the answers? I know this is meant to be a romantasy, but Aster's blatant disregard of the surrounding story is so apparent that it overtakes almost everything else. Oro's story was pretty bad, but Grimm's is worse. Now, in the series of Lightlark, there is the claim that there is a love triangle between Isla, Grimm, and Oro. And anyone who has actually read any of these books or watched my videos understands that that's not really true. And one way that I think that's pretty obvious is because the inside cover art for Grimm and Oro is of their wedding, and for Oro and Isla, it's Isla getting shot.
How romantic.
And also because the most work Aster put into the story, into any of this book, is a lot of the retcons that she had to fit in order to justify some of the things that happen in Crown Tide. Like, there is a lot of backtracking that she had to do in order to fix some things or to set Grimm up a particular way. This did come out before Crown Tide, so when we get things like the Infinite. Now, the Infinite itself is actually a very powerful diamond. It is perhaps the single most powerful artifact in the world of Lightlark, if not the entire universe of Lightlark, and that is a whole separate complaint that I've got for Crown Tide. Anyway, the Infinite is a particular diamond. Also, another way that allows us to see that Aster put more care into Grimm's side rather than Oro's is the fact that we know how old he is in this first chapter. He's talking with a sister of his, Layla, who is 8, and she is just a year older than him. Now, you might be thinking, Grimm had a sister? That's never come up before. You're right, it hasn't. Layla effectively didn't exist before this. Now, there is room for Grimm to have had a sister, but we have never gotten her name before. It has never even been hinted that Grimm had any sort of an attachment to any sibling. There was a scene, I think that was in Nightbane, where he reveals that his father had all of Grimm's siblings fight each other to the death in an arena. We get that scene, and that scene never happened. That'll make more sense in a little bit. So anyway, Grimm has something like 32 or 33 siblings. The only one that he has any connection with is Layla, his 1 year older sister. Grimm is the runt of the family. He is the smallest, he is seen as the weakest, he is the most likely to die in the arena. In fact, he has effectively given up on any chance of actually surviving to adulthood, whatever adulthood means in this universe, and he just wishes that Layla be a good ruler and to make his end quick. Now, I'm cheating a little bit when I describe this. In Crown Tide, early on, we get a scene from Grimm's point of view, and he complains about, what he did to his sister, to Layla. And I read this before I read this, so I was confused. What sister? At no point has Grimm ever indicated any sort of a past with a sister or any sort of regret from anything that happened to her. It read like a mess. Well, we get a little bit on Layla. You see, she can turn into a bat. That's her flair. And she's dead by chapter 3. Crown Tide spends so much time hyping her up and acting like she's this big pivotal character that was with Grimm through thick and thin, and her death is the biggest regret in his life, even though at no point in this series was it ever indicated that he had a sister in the first place. It is such a weak attempt to wedge in a character where none was before. It's one of those things where there was a gap, technically. There is technically nothing that contradicts this, but only because Grimm is so ill-defined as a character that he's got all of these blank spots where information can be filled in. Anyway, Grimm learns to teleport. That's his flair, and he spends the first who knows how long jumping around all over the place. The only person who knows that he can do this is Layla, who helps cover for him whenever he's out late and just, I guess, doesn't come back to the castle in time. You'll have to forgive me if I'm a tad scattered with some of my notes here. I actually didn't take any notes for the first 50 pages or so. Originally, I was just going to skim through this whole thing and try to be done with it as soon as possible, but there's so much juicy nonsense in here. I just had to take notes anyway. Anyway, so we get the arena fight called the Gauntlet, and Grimm's father, who again does not have a name, learns that Grimm can actually teleport. Now, this is significant because that was the same flair that their ancestor Cronin had. And because it sounds so very powerful, Grimm's father executed all of Grimm's siblings with the exception of Layla. I remember at some point Grimm detailed that he had to fight in an arena and kill multiple siblings, and he survived because he was the most powerful or whatever. That was a lie that he told Isla. The only one he fights is Layla, who turns into a bat and does try to kill him, so Grimm kind of reflexively lashes out at her and cuts her jugular? No. She tries to bite his jugular, but his shadows lash out and kind of stab her like multiple knives, and that kills her. Grimm is sad by this. He actually cradles Layla for a little bit and mourns her loss, and it's understandable. Your only sibling, the only one that you have any sort of a familial connection to, is now dead because of you. That would make anyone sad. The problem is, Aster rushed this moment, and we don't really have any time for Layla to stand out as a character. She barely appeared on the page. She was dead by page 19. And so, there's not a lot of time for her to reflect or stand out at all for the reader. There's not enough time for us to really empathize with her. It's not a happy moment, but it's also like, who cares? Like, Layla was a non-entity in the story, so much so that we didn't know she existed until 12 minutes ago. So, Grimm becomes the sole surviving heir of the Nightshade Empire. And he just goes on and starts killing people. And they go on multiple battlefields. I guess eventually they fight up against, like, they go up against Lightlark itself. Like, it says here that they've been fighting for 5 years. I'm like, how can you really, like, in terms of population, how can you justify this? Like, how can Aster justify this? Because it doesn't feel like they've got that many. Grimm actually recounts the death total after a battle and says that he killed 513 people. He alone did that. That has nothing, like, that says nothing of the amount of dead that the soldiers in his army killed, or who died in his army. Like, again, the population of this world makes no sense if you pay attention. Now, if Oro's prose made him sound whiny, Grimm's prose make him sound... God, he's such a wannabe edgelord. Like, you can read this as sarcastically as you want, and it might not be enough. My blade is covered in blood. Nothing new, at least not since my father waged war against Lightlark 5 years ago. I wipe it against the grass, my expression blank as I charge forward. Someone at my feet begs for mercy. He says he has children. I put my blade through his throat before he can say anything else. And then we actually get something that contradicts something that Grimm says in Oro's section when he says, only a fool would have a family as a warrior. Only a fool would do something as stupid as love anything or anyone when life so predictably turns to death. But Grimm used the soldiers and their families in order to guilt Oro and make him feel bad for killing people when he made that stupid argument that says that intentions don't matter to the dead. So what is it? Does having a family actually matter? Or does it only matter when Grimm is trying to win an argument? So Grimm's father kills Oro's parents. God, this entire book is just White Room Syndrome. And Grimm hates his father and makes that very clear in the first couple of chapters. He actually has a moment where he sees Oro charging at his father, sword ready to go, and thinks, you know, he should just let Oro kill his father. But no, instead the two of them fight for a couple of pages. Grimm uses the pain of loss, just thinking about Layla, and uses that to strengthen his powers. It's not enough, and apparently Oro is able to overpower him, and Nightshade is forced to retreat. After they retreat, Grimm finds his father slumped over in his throne, and he's like, you're supposed to be, like, really powerful. What's going on? And Grimm's father has been cursed by a diamond, the Infinite, specifically. This is something which ties into Crown Tide. Not very well, and really not very necessarily, but whatever. But apparently Grimm's father has been cursed. Now, do you need to actually understand that for the story at large? No, you don't. His father dies, so the curse is in a couple of chapters anyway. And with his father weakened, Grimm suggests a surrender and turns himself over to be a prisoner of war in the Lightlark prisons. Now, there were multiple chapters in Oro's section that went over a lot of things, and on page 31 we get this massive truncation of information. Like, Grimm opens this chapter by saying, today I was finally moved from the prisons to the castle. All that information that we could have gotten from Grimm's perspective as he was talking to Oro, and all of it gets skipped. Maybe Aster wasn't interested in exploring any of those scenes, or maybe she thought it was redundant to write about it twice from a different character's perspective when she already detailed it with Oro. Which begs the question, okay, then why does so much of this book just recap the events of Nightbane or Lightlark? But whatever. So pretty much everything involving Grimm from Oro's backstory is skipped over, so much so that So, look, to put yourself in my shoes, I read Grimm's section first, so when I got to this part here, and it's glossing over everything, I had no idea what was going on or why this book was even in place if we're not getting any details to any of this information. There's a section here where the curses happen, everyone's dying all around them. Grimm goes running through the halls and runs into Oro as he's cradling... Oh my god, I've forgotten her name. Agnes? He's cradling Agnes's body with her daughter, Aura. And it's just, the girl we saved together years ago. Like, what are you talking about? When did that happen? Grimm even refers to Oro as his only friend. So, yeah, Oro was stupid. If he had shown, like, a modicum of patience during any of this, and Grimm doesn't get off scot-free either. He should have explained the situation as much as he could have. And they threw it away. The whole thing is frustrating to read about because, like, if you idiots talked for 30 seconds with Oro's reality determination abilities, but no, Grimm just warps back home. His father is still alive but dying from the curses, and Grimm's father like tells him, kill your heart, kill your feelings, don't be a fool. And this imbues like this and a handful of other events prior in the story gets Grimm convinced that, hey, love is a bad idea, I should never fall in love with anyone. Hey, guess what happens? So we're only 35 pages into the story. There is still a lot of room to explore Grimm's backstory and to try to find out what his first days as a ruler. An unwitting, sudden arrival as the new king of Nightshade, and how turbulent that must have been as they have to figure out the curses and how to live about them, right? There is a lot more that you can explore with him, right? Wrong. No, page 36 just jumps us to 499 years later. This entire story is just 225 pages long. And Aster can't be bothered to really think about anything of Grimm's backstory. So much of this needs to be fleshed out so much more. But anyway, so Grimm has his evil council, and they're all talking about how he needs an heir. And like, after maybe 20 seconds of thought, Grimm's like, yeah, okay, whatever. Now, they do have the Drex to worry about. They are pouring out of the ground near certain villages, and they are draining a lot of resources. So Nightshades are dying in mass because of these things. And the idea of having an heir would be a good security blanket because the Nightshades don't really care about the other realms to begin with. And it's kind of funny, actually, because you may remember from Nightbane, there was that scene where Isla unwittingly showed up on Nightshade, and she got herself involved with the line of women who were waiting to consummate with the king, and Isla got herself just selected randomly. Well, that was the very first time Grimm tried to actually get a woman pregnant. And he claims, yeah, he's had many women before, so hey, he's totally not a virgin, guys.
It feels like a bag of sand.
But the very first time he runs into Isla, he sees that she has an aura about her. She's red, and that's different for some reason. Now, something else that Grimm's section does is it details that Grimm sees people's emotions, and that's not hugely important, I don't think. But he picks Isla, and then we get, frankly, a lot of detail as they make out, and Grimm's rising to the occasion, and eventually Isla just stabs him.
Well, kinda like that, only with less symbolism and more my penis in your vagina.
Now, Aster does try to justify why Grimm did not heal the scar that Isla gave him. Because he's trying to close himself off from everybody, and this scar will be a reminder of her, of how much I hate her.
Sure, Jan.
Consider how many fights, how many battles Grimm must have been in before this. How many of those scars did he keep? How many mementos? How many reminders? No, I think that this was just a really weak attempt to try to fit in a very illogical decision from a very stupid character. And Grimm just ruminates on this and is so upset with the idea that Isla could come to his land and try to kill him. In fact, he finds out where she lives and stalks her for several days. So yes, both Grimm and Oro are certified stalkers. Why is this a thing? Why is this a celebrated trope? Stalking is bad. Don't do it. But no, he stalks her for several days because he's got to find out how she teleports, because he's very confused by that whole thing. The gall of someone else using his power to warp in and try to kill him. Eventually, Grimm warps to Isla's bedroom to try to steal the Star Stick back from her. And we get the line, "She's looking at me like I'm a monster. Good. I am one." Grimm is the edgiest edgy boy to ever edge. And then, following some events from Nightbane, Isla demands that he gets out of her room, so he teleports away. Then he comes back, I think like the next day, and tears her room apart, looking for the whole thing, or looking for the Star Stick, can't find it, so Isla goes right for it, picks it up out of its hiding spot, and Grimm's like, "Hey, thank you for fighting for me." And Isla begs him to let her keep it, and I don't know why I let her have it. So this might as well be Aster saying, "Hey, I couldn't think of a real motivation for this, so just go with it. Stop asking questions." Like, it makes no sense for a man who has apparently not felt an ounce of sympathy or empathy for the last 5 centuries allow a random woman who stabbed him in the chest to have one of the most powerful artifacts on the planet. Now, it's actually pretty funny because Grimm at this point figures out that the Star Stick was the portaling device that he gave his general, his most trusted friend. And I'm amused that a man as close to Grimm, that gained his trust so much so that Grimm would grant his power into a stick and hand it to this man in order to find the Drek Sword. Grimm's beloved trusted general doesn't have a name. He is referred to multiple times in Grimm's section, and at no point is ever given a name. Why don't these people have names? It doesn't even... Call him Bob! I don't care. Give me something here. Grimm trusted a man with a section of himself, a section of his deeply coveted, protected power, and doesn't know the man's name.
That man needs a name.
So Grimm pushes the focus away from Isla for about a page and a half when he details how dangerous the Dreks are, and he states that these are not normal creatures, they are cursed warriors, beasts that were made. And in that way, I guess that we're going with the Nightbane definition of the Dreks rather than the Skyshade definition of the Dreks, where Aster retconned their history and stated that they actually came from, some hole in the sky, as opposed to they were cursed into existing. And Grimm is one of the only people who can actually stop them. He's one of the only ones strong enough, which is weird because apparently he stops them using calcified shadows. Now, calcified means that it's got calcium in it, so I guess his shadows are good for both killing sisters and for your teeth.
Naughty.
Although, apparently, he needs to be sad in order to get the proper calcification into his shadows, so I guess being sad, drains the calcium out of his bones or something so he can put it into enemies? I don't know. Somebody prove me wrong. So we get that scene where Grimm and Isla have that fight in the forest where she tries to trick him by getting him to step into the sticky mud, and it doesn't quite work. He, threatens her and says, "I never want to see you in my lands again," and then fucks off. And then, I guess a couple of days later, he comes back and watches her sleep. So, that's creepy. Why is that a unifying thing? We get that in Edward, in Twilight. We get that, I think Christian Grey does that a little bit, and now Grimm. Why are all these guys creepers? Why is that attractive? Now, moving on, when I was reading this, I wasn't, fully committing myself to every individual word to try to analyze every single thing. I wanted to get through this quickly. So I got to a point where I realized, hey, Aster didn't include the scene with the blacksmith. That whole thing where Isla gets her blood analyzed or something and she stabs the blacksmith guy in the eyeball. Well, it turns out Aster did include that. It's just incredibly truncated down to the barely even a full page. And believe it or not, this may be the single worst scene that Aster could have truncated. This scene in Nightbane was one of the more important ones because it's where Grimm realized he could use Isla to possibly break the curse on the Drex sword and use that to control the Drex so that they would stop murdering his people. And by cutting this scene, by minimizing it the way that Aster does, you have effectively removed any kind of an arc Grimm could travel along through this book. He would have gone from deciding to use Isla to save his kingdom to sparing her because he's actually in love with her and he wants to keep her around. Now, that would have actually fit within the idea of a romantasy arc that he could have traveled down. This is actually in Aster's best interest to keep in place because it shows Grimm's growth. And it plays along with the enemies to lovers thing that she apparently loves so much. But I guess it would have made Grimm look like a jerk if he had done that, so the scene is minimized. And it's made even worse because by this point in the story, he's already spent several pages talking about how lovely Isla is and how he can't stop thinking about her, which is probably why he's been stalking her for a while. And even worse, by removing this initial maybe I can kill her for the benefit of my people arc, you have changed Grimm's trajectory in the story, at least within this story, so that now he goes from, yeah, I could see myself putting my penis in that, to, okay, I definitely want to put my penis in that. This entire book is such a mess. Now, unfortunately, the Grimm penis arc is finished about 50 pages after the two of them meet, which means there's more than 100 pages after that that's basically filler as far as Grimm's arc is concerned. Not only does minimizing Grimm's arc eliminate any real growth he could have, but it makes the barriers he hoisted up look flimsy and artificial. He didn't isolate himself because he was a tortured, traumatized guy carrying the weight of the world. He was a poser who was putting on airs for some reason, likely because he thought it made him look cool. Instead of bolstering Grimm's agency with this book, Aster's eliminated it. Grimm didn't overcome centuries of trauma and isolation. It was never there to begin with. The other problem with the way that Grimm is written in this is that he's entirely too self-aware for his inner turmoil to make any sense. Grimm knows his limits and what he's supposed to feel and why, but his battling his attraction means he spent 500 years never thinking sexually at all, since his description makes him sound like an edgelord who finally hit puberty in his late 30s. Or in his case, his late 530s. 500 years of behavior and habits were undone in what reads like an instant since Grimm has finally decided at long last that he wants to get his dick wet. Now, one thing that I did very briefly with Nightbane was trying to match up some of the dialogue to see how well it actually carries over. And something that I noticed is that not only does the dialogue match up one-to-one, and that's fine. The dialogue probably should match up. Faulty memories can be argued, but whatever. I'm fine with the dialogue just being a one-to-one comparison. That works. What doesn't work is the fact that the prose is almost the same. The words are different, the emotions are not. That's what kills the book here. Not only are you getting a weak retelling of Nightbane in this story, you're getting not just effectively the same story, you're getting almost exactly the same story. Isla's got some strange feelings towards Grimm because, oh, there's just something so magnetic and nondescript about him. And Grimm is the same way. Oh, he can't stop thinking about what's-her-face for some reason that he can't possibly describe. You know, when I was reading this, I was actually reminded of the story Courage Under Fire. Now, in the movie, the captain, blanking, Meg Ryan's character, she dies. And Denzel Washington has to go around and investigate, interview all of the squad mates who were with her when she made her final decisions. and get their perspective on the event. And the movie shows us the same scene over and over and over using the same dialogue, but slight tweaks in how they're presented. The emotions or the intonations in the words between the characters are changed, and it's subtle, but it gives you a different meaning between each scene. And it's actually a very cleverly written story. Nothing like what we get here. The emotions are exactly the same between Grimm and Isla as they basically match each other between this and Nightbane. Very disappointing. This entire thing is a waste of time. Eventually Grimm and Isla, they're working together looking for the direct sword, and they get to the part where they find the cave of Iridia, I think, and there's a dragon guarding the sword. I think this is the part where they activate the first trap and he gets embedded with like a dozen swords, or a dozen arrows rather. And this leads to the discussion that pain can grant power. And Grimm says that he has purposely caused himself pain to access deeper levels of power. Now, we don't get this in Nightbane, but it turns out that that was a lie. He may not have physically hurt himself in a while to access power, but he has accessed emotional pain. And this is one of those moments where, reading this as a guy, I can't help but notice how much this doesn't work. Now, there are plenty of examples of guys writing women where it doesn't work because women don't think that way, they don't act like that. The female characters that guys write are presented in so unrealistic a fashion that it immediately causes a disconnect between the reader and the character. I think the famous example is her breasts boobed boobily. Well, the same can be true of the opposite, where you have women who don't know how to write men. And this entire thing, look, Oro's section is blasé enough. He is so much of a flat piece of bread that we never really get into his head at all. There's minimal depth. Grimm, there is an attempt to get at the underlying attraction to see how he really ticks. And there's only so much that I can really go into for YouTube standards, but I can get into this section because guys don't really think like this. This is not unheard of, but it is very uncommon. Look, this is something that even The Force Awakens got right, because there's that one scene when Kylo Ren is fighting Rey, and he's been shot in the side by the Chewie's blaster bolt, and Kylo punches himself in the side to cause physical pain because that's what powers the dark side of the Force, and he's able to amplify his powers that way. Okay, so I'm going to descend into a bit of controversy here. This is in no way a universal rule, and you will absolutely be able to think of 1,000 examples countering what I'm about to say. That's fine. Again, this is not a universal rule, but generally speaking, very broadly generally speaking, when you are writing men, you want to consider things from the physical and the visual. Women, by contrast, are more emotional and mental. It makes more sense for Grimm to actually, press on a wound or stab himself in a non-vital area if he needs to use pain to grant power, rather than think about how sad he is that his sister has been dead for the last 500 years. Dude, after a while, just go to therapy. And yet, that's a tidbit that I wouldn't really expect someone like Aster to understand, because she already doesn't understand her own characters trying to get directly into a guy's head. It was never going to work. And that is the majority of what all of this is. Grimm just fawning over Isla, begging her to reach out and touch him. It is so pathetic. The only comparison I can really make to Grimm is Harvey Weinstein. Over and over and over, just stalking her and pining after her. It gets so tiring after a while. It is the same thing page after page after page. So much so that Aster eventually, she forgets to write the actual story. The events, the plot line of trying to find the direct sword very much takes a backseat in order to focus on the relationship between Grimm and Isla. Yes, that is where Aster has her greatest focus of the story, her greatest interest in this book, and the reason why she wrote it in the first place. I get that. I understand that interest. It doesn't make for good reading, though. Every page for the last 100 pages have been really tepid plot, if there was any at all, dwarfed by Grimm's hormones finally hitting puberty. Like, I have genuinely lost count of how many times he has thought, I really want her to touch me. After what feels like 30 pages of nonstop pining over Isla, the plot finally kicks in again, sort of, when the two of them decide to go to I think it was a starling market looking for sparks to distract the dragon in the cave. And we get an interesting opening to this chapter on page 184 when Grimm says, I am greedy, I am selfish, I am despicable. While Isla is breathing softly against my neck, tucked into my side, her leg draped over me, while she sleeps more soundly than I have seen her sleep in months, I tell myself, I am going to tell her the truth. I'm going to tell her my plan. I'm going to tell her about the sword, about how I have no intention of going to the Centennial. And this is interesting because we have nothing that actually supports this from his point of view. What has he done from his perspective that would grant him any sort of proclamation of greed or selfishness? Grimm calls himself selfish and despicable, but there's nothing we've seen that really supports this from his point of view. Why would he consider himself these things at all? The framework of his upbringing, what little we've seen, would justify most of how we've seen him act. Grimm's moral compass is based on something completely foreign to him in this scene. Aster just considered a basic moral framework when writing him, but never considered how Grimm would perceive the world, so this is another way in which Grimm's agency is being eroded. Grimm seems to confirm that his moral error is lying to Isla about why he wants the sword, and the fact that he doesn't want to go to the Centennial. This is made even dumber when you realize that there's nothing actually stopping him from being open with Isla and telling the truth, which could lead to her practicing her powers and learning how to properly unlock the sword without dying. Yes, that would mean that the events of Nightbane wouldn't happen the way that they do, but that just demonstrates how poorly Aster thought all of this through. When you're writing something like morality for a character, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. Consider everything that they've learned up to a certain point in the story. Why would they be justified in thinking the way that they do? I mean, do they have any sort of religious backing? Have they learned to fear other people and not trust anyone? Why would lying be bad for someone like Grimm? None of this gets considered, and it's just another way in a long list of ways that the characters in this series just feel hollow. And none of this is even supported in the text because, like, a couple pages later, Grimm gives two counterexamples to why his framework doesn't make any sense. He's trying to think everything over and trying to research how he can possibly get the sword without hurting Isla, and he realizes it's impossible. Only a love bond could save us, but as much as I care for her, as much as she has become my heart, the strength needed for her to access my abilities, for me to give them to her, it's more than my cold heart could give. You've spent the last 130 pages simping over her. And then he goes and contradicts himself again by saying, if only I could, if only I hadn't hardened myself against emotions so long ago. You just said she became your heart. That sounds like love. What are you talking about? On top of that, you just had a discussion about how you have used emotional pain in order to give yourself strength. How are you hardening yourself against your emotions and using your emotions in combat? And I haven't really gone over this because, again, shorter review, but a lot of the prose in Grimm's section has been very emotionally driven. There is barely any dangerous loner prose anywhere in this book, like what Aster seems to be aiming for. This is instead friendless loser talk. Like, the idea that Grimm does not feel emotions is not supported at all anywhere in this text. And then Grimm contradicts himself again on the next page when he thinks, turning off my emotions and just doing. You were just talking about how you had hardened your emotions and don't feel things 2 pages ago. What are you doing? But eventually, Isla and Grimm do finally hook up, and the scene we get is exactly the way that it's described from Isla's perspective. Vague, broadly applied metaphors.
It's just like the first one!
Some more stuff happens. They eventually get the sword. Grimm realizes that it's not worth using the sword if it means costing him Isla, so he steals the Star Stick and warps to go fight the Drex. Isla grabs the sword, opens up a portal, and follows him. And it's only when that happens in front of him that Grimm realizes that the only way she can use his powers is if he loves her. And again, it makes no sense that the magic in this world works this way, but whatever. This moment where Grimm is on the battlefield, surrounded by the Drex, constantly threatening the people around him, it just... the image that we get doesn't work. I smile, even as death rages around us. Even as my own is imminent, I can die now, with a smile on my lips. Like, this is the sort of thing where you get contrasting images that only really work in a comedy.
やめる時も悲しみの時もどんな困難が訪れようとも共に助けよう。
But then Isla unlocks the sword and dies because of it. And we do get a bit of an expansion. We don't get this scene in Nightbane. We get to see some of the immediate aftermath as they're still on the battlefield, as Grimm has saved Isla's life. This is not forever. I know that. But I will find a way to make it so. I will find a solution. For now, though, it means we share a life. Her eyes widen. She takes a shaking breath. You, she frowns. You gave your life for me. Yeah. Well, some of it. Well, not a lot of it. Well, maybe a year. Which is really inconsequential when you consider that I'm over 500 years old. For real though, this is like saying that Elon Musk shared his vast fortune with you when all he did was give you the loose change out of his car. Now, one of the more crucial moments that we need to get from Grimm's perspective is when he finds out that Celeste is actually Aurora and how she tricked him into siding with her and erasing Isla's memories, because that is all necessary background information that really needs to be fleshed out for us to properly understand his state of mind going into the events of Lightlark. So naturally, we don't get any of that. The last chapter, and I'm not kidding, the last chapter is a really brief wedding scene between Isla and Grimm in which he doesn't give her the necklace, which is culturally significant and cannot be removed until you die. So the scene is incomplete even in context, but that's how it ends. Wedding scene, done. And then it's the end. And that is the whole of Oro and Grimm. Grimm and Oro. Goro. This is such a shocking waste of time. There was so much that I skipped over. Just the awful lines, the logic that don't make sense, the repetition in the events that match one-to-one everything from Lightlark and Nightbane, which makes this wholly unnecessary. Just when I finished Grimm's section, I put the book down and just said, well, that was stupid. I now understand Grimm less than I did before, which is impressive in all the wrong ways. Grimm lost character agency, and his motivations/prose were wildly inconsistent with past incarnations and internally. Aster's greatest chance for telling a good story here was to expand on several scenes that could have used definition, like Grimm conspiring with Aurora to wipe Isla's memory. What really went into his head when he agreed to that, especially after all the romance for the whole of this story? Not only did all the obvious holes not get filled in, but the bulk of Grimm's story is just Nightbane 2.0, which we really didn't need. The only scene that we got that was new was Grimm's sister, but she doesn't have enough presence to be even called a speed bump. She's dead by chapter 3 and forgotten by chapter 4. So this doesn't do anything to advance either Grimm or Oro in the Lightlark series. We now understand their characters less. There are a lot more negatives that were not there before. Aster does not know how to write a guy, which is going to be more of a problem in Crown Tide because several chapters are written from both Grimm and Oro's perspectives. No, they don't work. The only information we actually gain that we didn't have before is almost entirely negative. Like, nothing deepens our understanding of the characters, the universe, their histories. Like, the information here should have been complementary to the events of Lightlark. Like, I was gonna say not supplementary, but it's not even supplementary. This was wholly unnecessary, and when it wasn't unnecessary, it was damaging. I understand things less than I did before I opened this book. And some of this, aside from the obvious cash grab that this is, some of this was done in order to grant better context for events in Crown Tide, and let me tell you, you don't need this. There are several times where Crown Tide will harken back to an event that happens in this book. Not once is it important. Not once does it fill in information. The writing is awful, the characters are awful, Grimm loses what could have been a character arc. This is the worst book in the series. Unironically, and I mean this genuinely, this is a 1 out of 10. Mechanically, and with how well it fits in with the rest of the story, I do consider this book to be as bad as 64 Squares. Like, I can't help but look at this and think, God damn it, what are we doing as a species? But whatever. So hopefully that was fun. I really just did that in case there were any gaps or anything that people wanted to know before I go into Crown Tide. I will be filming for this very soon. God only knows how long that video is going to be, but it should be fun.